Good evening, everyone. We are excited to begin this panel this morning, the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus 2022 Legislative Session Panel. I'm Jason Hughes from House District 100 in New Orleans. I have the honor of moderating this morning. I will begin by introducing our panelists, starting from my immediate right, the gentlelady from the great city of Shreveport, the Honorable State Representative Tammy Phelps. The distinguished gentleman from Alexandria, Representative Ed Larvadain, the Honorable Vincent Pierre, Chairman of the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus, my friend and neighbor from the city of New Orleans, representing House District 99, the Honorable Candace Newell, and my big brother, the gentleman from East Baton Rouge and West Baton Rouge, the Honorable Attorney Edmond Jordan. Such an honor to have my colleagues as we go through this panel this morning. Panelists, just a reminder, this hour is going to fly by really fast and we have a lot of ground to cover. So I'm going to ask that you keep your responses limited to about 2 minutes. Any event that you go over, I'm going to chime in very respectfully but forcefully, so just keep that in mind. As we know, the legislative session began on March 14th, and members of the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus from across the state we want to share expectations. So let us go ahead and delve right in. Representative Candace Newell, I'm going to begin with you. We just finished a special redistricting session. We know the audience is going to hear more about this in depth later today. But why don't you start by letting us know how that process went in our special session, where we are now with redistricting.
Thank you very much, Representative Hughes. The redistricting session started in February. We started out with several bills that drew new maps for our congressional districts, House districts, Senate, Public Service Commission, and the Bessie Board. Unfortunately, we only had one map covering each one of those seats, one map for each one of those areas that came out of committee. There were several maps which were introduced, which were heavily debated, but like I said, only one came out for each area. Right now, the governor, as you know, last week vetoed the congressional maps because of the 10 meetings that we had across this state. It was a continuous ask that we get another congressional district, another majority congressional district. However, the map that was produced and made it off the floor into the governor's desk kept the status quo with one majority district, which is District 2, held by Congressman Troy Carter. We also had an ask for additional majority House districts. We did not get a new one. The narrative was, well, we gave you another one. We did not get another one. It was moved from North Louisiana to Southeast Louisiana and New Orleans. So right now we have several pieces of litigation in the courts right now debating all of the maps. And again, the governor vetoed the congressional maps. So we'll most likely be seeing this again when it comes to the House, Senate, and congressional maps.
Representative Jordan, from your perspective, as Representative Newell said, we know that the governor only signed 2 maps into law. Those were the Bessie maps and the Public Service Commission. He allowed the State House and State Senate maps to go into effect without his signature, and the only map that he vetoed was the congressional map. Obviously, we in the legislature are gearing up for a potential veto session and showdown. What do you think will happen next, and how do you feel that the redistricting session went from your perspective?
Well, I will say, I think, disappointed would probably be an understatement. I understand why they only do these redistricting sessions once every 10 years. I will tell you, I've been involved in several special sessions dealing with the budget. And while those things got a little contentious, I venture to say I haven't seen anything as contentious as this. So, we've been, again, disappointed in a number of factors. And Jason, as I said earlier on the floor, in 1868, 3 years after Reconstruction, 3 years after slavery, we had 29 representatives in the House of Representatives. And we didn't have 105 at that time. So we actually have 29 today and 29 that's been proposed with the new maps. So we have a lesser percentage of African American representation now in 2022 and going forward into 2032 than we did from 1868. So I don't consider that progress. And so we need to move forward. The African American population has increased. We're almost 33 to 35% African American. We're 40% non-white. The numbers have increased from 2010. And to ask us to accept the same as we've had before while we've increased in our representation is unacceptable. So I just think that we need to continue to fight. We need to move on with the litigation. And I hope the litigation is successful. That's my hope. And we'll leave it up to the courts to determine what they do. So I do think that we'll have a veto session on the map. But I will say this in closing. I am not sure if that is actually constitutional, because we'd have to have two concurrent sessions going on. And so without getting into much of the details of that, I just think that's going to be a challenge as well.
Chairman Pierre, you were sworn in on February 1st around 2 p.m. and 3 hours later we convened for our redistricting session. You're the senior member on this panel this morning. From a Legislative Black Caucus standpoint, what's your thoughts on the redistricting session and how we move forward?
Thank you, and again, thanks to the Urban League for providing this information or this informational seminar and our panel for us. Of course, I call it a discriminatory redistricting process. We were 33% African Americans in this as we enter this redistricting process, and as you can see, it remains status quo. It was a tough journey, but we were able to collaborate and talk about what we need to do and how it needs to be done. And thanks to the great members we have on that committee, we were able to at least have some conversations, but we were not successful. You know that it's going to be a challenge, and we're going to face the same thing this upcoming session. We're going to talk about it again. They're going to try what we call trickery to, what I say, try to bring this piece of legislation or something back up. But I don't think it'll remain status quo. I think this will go to court, and we will continue to have that battle.
Representative Phelps, obviously North Louisiana was a key part of the conversation during the redistricting session. Collectively, you, Mayor turned Representative Cedric Glover, and Chairman Sam Jenkins led a very aggressive effort to add additional minority seats. From your perspective, talk about redistricting for a minute.
Just real quickly, reiterating everything that my colleagues have stated before, definitely when we went into the process of considering seats that were term limited, Republican seats in our area for one, that was definitely not a thought that we would be trying to maintain a Republican district in the north, taking a Democratic seat in Northeast, and actually, as Representative Newell says, shifting it to the south, to the central area. So the tactic that was used, we tried to combat it to say there are other opportunities. Did the House even consider other maps? And I think we all know that word considered, asking several times, the answer was always we stuck to traditional lines. That was something I don't think any of us were prepared for, but I don't think our efforts were in vain. We're very thankful for the NAACP, the Legal Defense Fund, and all the other entities that stood with us and are at the forefront of our filings.
Thank you, Representative Phelps. We know that as the conference proceeds, there'll be more on redistricting, but Representative Larvadain, want you to round us out. We know that you're a practicing attorney and cases have already been filed regarding the State House and State Senate maps. What do you think will happen in the court system, and where do you think that will end up ultimately on the State House and Senate maps in particular?
Well, I want to thank the members of House and Government and Senate Government because they did an excellent job in putting documents in the record. The record is vital. If you look at the population of the census, Louisiana had a population of about 4.6 million. That's roughly the size of Houston. That's Harris County, Fort Bend, and those areas. African Americans make up about 1.6 million. We had a problem with the numbers because we didn't think they were accurate because a lot of African Americans didn't participate in the census. So if you look at the data, with all the maps that were shown, none of the maps were able to get out of the committee. On the House side, you had several maps. On the Senate side, you had several maps. We were able to articulate some good reasons. My good friend, Representative Royce Duplessis, put a lot of data in. Sam Jenkins, my colleague, Ms. Newell, all of those, and also Judge, did a super job of putting documents in the record. I'm hoping and praying that once we get all the documents, we can show and prove to the courts that it violated the Second Amendment, it violated the Civil Rights Act. We want to show that the maps were unfair so we can get fair districts. If we're going to move this state forward, we have to get fair districts, and we have to make sure everybody's represented. We had a group of young people from Shreveport who came, who were from, I think, from one of the high schools. They wanted a diverse Louisiana. If we're going to keep young folks, we have to get fair maps, and everybody has to be represented. No matter what your skin type or whatever it is, we need fair maps. If we're going to move this state forward, we can't stay stuck in 1950s map. We have to be diverse. We have to be inclusive. If we expect these young folks to stay here and thrive and make money, that's the only way we're going to do it. So we're hoping that we've got enough data we can present with the NAACP, Legal Defense, and all the groups. We're hoping we've got enough data, and we're hoping we can show the federal courts that we need extra districts. On the House side, real quickly, we lost District 23, which is my friend, the great Kenny Cox district. That district was important because that included Natchitoches, that included Coshado, and Mansfield. Up in that area, that's a minority district. We were hoping to keep that district, but we lost that district. That district was transferred to New Orleans area. But with the increase in population, we were hoping to increase our numbers in the House and in the Senate. But we're hoping to be successful with the court case.
Thank you, Representative Larvadain. Obviously, redistricting very important, but as I let off and said, we're currently in the regular session, so many issues of great importance. Last year in 2021, obviously that was a fiscal session, but regular bills were filed as well, general bills. And there were some great wins, obviously, that we are proud of, and many wins that the Legislative Black Caucus was able to champion. But certainly there were many disappointments, particularly regarding people that we care about. And when you look at the role, scope, and mission of the Legislative Black Caucus, I want my colleagues to look ahead a little bit to our current session. And Chairman Pierre, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to jump to Representative Jordan. Talk to us a little bit about our current session. What are the dynamics going into this 2022 regular legislative session, and what are the big issues that we can expect to see and are anticipating this session?
From what I'm understanding, we have somewhere between 800 to 1,000 pieces of legislation, and a lot of it is probably going to be surrounded around healthcare initiatives. As you've seen in the pandemic, a lot of bills as it relates to who should be vaccinated, who should not be vaccinated, as it relates to the educational system, and the vaccine is definitely going to be something that you're going to hear a whole lot about. Of course, the infrastructure is a major issue, and there's tons of dollars that are coming in from the federal government that's going to be spent throughout the state. What I'm also hearing is that a lot of it's going to be spent on roads and bridges to the tune of about $500 million for the Baton Rouge Bridge, as you know, right here, which is a major artery that brings traffic to and from this entire state. You're going to hear a lot of talk about teachers' pay. The governor has proposed some $12,000 increase in teachers' pay, and after the RAC meets, additional $500. So hopefully we'll see that, and that's something that's needed for the teachers. Of course, criminal justice is indeed going to be a busy committee. My good friend Jordan has filed some great legislation, and you're going to hear a lot about what's proposed in criminal justice. So those are just some of the bills that I know committees are going to be extremely busy, and hope that at some point we're very successful in trying to enact legislation that is important to the working poor and the people that we represent in our districts.
Representative Jordan, you've been a leading voice in the legislature on issues related to criminal justice reform. You also are an expert on issues related to insurance. And obviously, given the natural disasters that have plagued Louisiana, insurance will also be at the forefront. Would you touch on criminal justice issues as well as insurance issues that we can expect to see this legislative session, and what are your thoughts? What are the dynamics around those particular issues?
Well, thank you, Jason. Look, and I would tell you, part of the dynamics I would tell you for 2022 session is I think you'll see a lot of the more controversial issues this session as opposed to next year. Of course, next year will be leading into an election cycle. And so I'm not sure if people are going to be touching as many hot button issues. So I think this is going to be a very heated session. That being said, on the criminal justice front, I will tell you for myself, I have a bill that would reform criminal civil asset forfeiture. And so for people who may not be familiar with it, if you're pulled over for suspected of a crime, let's say drugs, for instance, they find cash, they take the cash, they seize it, and they hold it. And there's a certain amount of time that you can have before you recover it. The problem with that is the way the money is split. So it's split between the police department, the DAs, and the judges. So what incentive do those people have to give you your money back? Even if you're innocent. It's a clear conflict of interest. And so those are some of the things that I want to attack on the criminal justice front. The other one, and the big issue for me, obviously this year, again, is qualified immunity. The qualified immunity issue, for those who really don't understand, is something that allows law enforcement officers, police officers, to violate your constitutional rights, basically with impunity. And so, look, you've had justices from conservative as Clarence Thomas to Justice Sotomayor and others throughout the system saying that it's time to end. And it actually began during the civil rights movement, and so which gave these law enforcement officers these protections. And so it's a judicially created doctrine. It's time to eliminate it. It's been eliminated in Colorado and a couple of other states, but we need to eliminate it here in Louisiana. And trying to stay within the 2 minutes, I'll say lastly, on the insurance front, we're going to have a lot of bills that deal with the hurricanes and storm relief. I think people are finally, you always hear about the tort reform side of insurance. I think people are finally realizing that insurance companies need to play fair with the consumers and the people that pay premiums every month. Someone said something very interesting to me the other day. They said it's expensive to be poor in Louisiana, and that is the truth, And so one of the things that I have is a bill that does away with discriminatory factors in insurance ratings. A lot of people may not know education is one of the factors that is used. We are here in Louisiana, approximately 60 to 70% of the state does not have anything past a high school diploma. But if you don't have a college education in Louisiana, you're penalized by the insurance companies. People with college degrees actually pay less, even with the exact same driving record as people that don't have college degrees. And so it is always amazing to me and baffling that we have some Republicans that live in districts with 90% of the population without a college degree, and yet they will not vote to do away with these discriminatory factors, which affect a super majority of their population, of their constituents that they represent. So we have those type bills, but I am hopeful. I think this year in insurance, if you're going to ever see consumer-friendly bills get through that committee, I think this year is the year for it.
Thank you, Representative Jordan. Representative Phelps, you are the only member of this panel currently serving on the House Education Committee. Obviously, last session, lots of talk around critical race theory. I think we've seen a couple of bills filed again this year on critical race theory. The minimum foundation plan formula was delivered to the legislature this week from Bessie. Teacher pay raises. Give us a preview of what we can expect to see this session on the education front, and what are your thoughts on how some of these bills will pan out?
Thank you, Jason. Exactly those things. And I'm thinking as Jordan was talking, when we talk about those discriminatory factors, I can't even stress how important education is in our state, from the sense that it appears now that most of the bills being presented would make you wonder if we're trying to do away with public education. Critical race theory has been confirmed by the Department of Education that is not being taught in Louisiana. And basically, if there was a plea of any type of information, I basically would like to say that African history is American history. And that's all we were talking about, even when we started this conversation last year, by one of the bills presented by Representative Duplessis was teaching more of African American history, and that has turned into a whirlwind of trying to change the narrative of just including all of Louisiana's history as well as the American history in its own. Some of the bills that we talk about critical race theory are started in the House that clearly should have gone to Bessie last year, but now we see that precedence has been stated or started that skip over Bessie meetings and your topic and bring it straight to the House. I have a bill, even talking with, when we want to go back to the insurance thing, of how that affects our insurance coverages. Overage students that are still graduating, not knowing how to read. The social promotion has been something that's pushed our students through, and now it becomes a topic of Louisiana not having a workforce, an educated workforce. So once we address the education part, I think all of the other factors of income and insurance will start to get a little better. And I don't know if we have an education friendly legislature at this point, because I don't know what is important. And I do want to see at some point that we are a state that makes education important at the forefront. Our teachers, again, we're at a critical point of where retention and recruiting is at jeopardy. I'm definitely trying to address that with so thankful that we still have students who are interested in education, but what are they looking forward to? So we definitely have a conversation to say, what if, we have less teachers than we have at this point, where will we be? So I'm hoping that my colleagues will really think very serious about the bills that they're filing, and most importantly, if I could, there was a bill brought forth by our new chairman, who is not an educator, or I understand no education background. And the first bill that was pre-filed had to do with teachers putting a year-long worth of lesson plans publicly on the internet. Anyone in educating or any kind of planning know that that's impossible to try to do when you have needs of individual students that you need to meet for them to be successful. And we were floored. I think all of the committees were floored. White, black, Republicans and Dems on that issue. So we're hoping that would be brought back and put education back at the forefront for what it's really like.
Thank you, Representative Phelps. Another topic, Representative Larvadain, sure to dominate the session, is health and healthcare issues. You serve on the Health and Welfare Committee. One thing that COVID-19 exposed is that African American residents died disproportionately from COVID-19, and further exposed healthcare disparities amongst African Americans. What are some of we're seeing bills, several bills around vaccines, vaccine issues and COVID issues. What are some of the other big issues in health and healthcare that we can expect to see this legislative session?
We're going to have a bunch of vital bills with health and welfare. If you look at our budget is about $36 billion, and about half of it is health and welfare. We receive a lot of Medicaid from the federal government. Health and welfare is one of those challenging committees. When you look at COVID, in the African American community, we knew we had some health issues. We knew we had obesity issues, we had hypertension, we had stroke. But when COVID hit, it changed the game. Those issues became more prevalent because it hit us in the African American community so quickly. I remember a lot of my colleagues in New Orleans, a lot of them had families and friends die immediately after Mardi Gras about 2 years ago, because that's when COVID hit. In the Health and Welfare Committee, we have some of our extreme colleagues that are just anti-vaxxers. My position is that if it could keep our young folks healthy and keep our community healthy, I'm for that. I've got a problem with folks who say I'm an anti-vaxxer, but then when they get sick, they tie up our hospitals. That's the issue. Every hospital in the state, if you look at New Orleans, you look at Tours filled, Tulane was filled, LSU Medical, all your hospitals all over Oceans were filled. My two hospitals in Alexandria, Rapides, Cabrini, they were filled. They were filled with people saying, hey, I don't want the shot, I'm an anti-vaxxer, but yet I want first-class health care. A lot of those folks were saying, hey, I don't have an insurance card, but I want to tie up a bed. we're going to have to deal with COVID. COVID is not through with us. I know Representative Hughes is a vocal member of Health and Welfare. That's a monster. We cannot proceed as a state if we're not healthy. You see the disruption in academics, in the schools, in the classrooms. We have to stay healthy. You look at the supply chain issues with merchandise. People want to go back to work, but we got to deal with COVID. So some of the issues we're going to be dealing with is Medicaid. A lot of my colleagues, Republicans, hate Medicaid, but yet a lot of people in the district need Medicaid. You know, if you look at all the children born, and this was one of the facts I found out, recently 65% of the children born in Louisiana are Medicaid children. That means out of 10 people who go to the hospital to deliver a baby, only 3 have medical insurance. When you look at medical insurance, you're looking at Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Humana, so forth. So we cannot afford to be an unhealthy state. I'm going to be voicing my opinion about Medicaid, making sure we protect that, make sure we protect those hospitals. Most important, we've got to find a way to fund those hospitals because those hospitals lost a lot of money because they provided care for a lot of people who are uninsured. We've got to do a better job of funding those hospitals, and we've got to encourage the folks that you've got to get the vaccine, you've got to stay healthy, and whatever happens, you've got to wear your mask, social distance. You have to be smart. We can't have another 2 years where everybody's sick because who's going to take care of us if everybody's sick? We've got a large amount of people who have retired in the medical field, and then we're concerned with who are these new doctors, who are these new nurses? Are they going to work those 60 hours that the former staff work? So there's a lot of issues with health care, with Medicaid, and with the vaccine. I'm going to be voicing my opinion. I'm going to represent my city and my state because we have to have a healthy population.
Thank you, Representative Larvadain. We're about halfway through this panel, and you guys are doing great. Really appreciate that. Representative Newell, I want to round out this question with you, but I want to specifically focus on the dynamics of this session. I think everyone did a good job giving us an overview of the big topics that we're going to see. As we stated earlier, you serve on House and Governmental, and so you were at the forefront of redistricting, and obviously that process was very contentious at times. When we talk about the dynamics of this session, do you think hard feelings from the redistricting session will spill over into this session, or do you think that we're starting this session with a clean slate and that Democrats and Republicans will be able to come together on contentious issues for the good of Louisiana? What's your thoughts specifically on the dynamics?
My hopes are that we can start off with a clean slate. So far, and this being day 4 of the regular session, it seems like people have kind of pocketed some of those feelings from that we had at the end of the special session. However, that's me living in my world of cotton candy and rainbows. When we get these bills that we've all just spoken about, I believe that's when you're going to start seeing some of that tension from last session start to spill over, especially when we start looking at these new maps that have been introduced into the files. So I'm hoping, again, I'm hoping that we have a great session, but I just don't see that being it. It's going to be the discussion about the need to have more minority representation on top of the need for properly educating our children, along with the argument as to why we need to have raised minimum wage, why we need to have equal pay, why do we need to continue to keep the Medicaid, Medicare program going. So it's going to be all of these common sense discussions that are heavily weighed with nonsense on top of the contention from the end of last session, because again we're going to be looking at maps and people holding on to these districts as though it is their constitutional right and not a privilege given to them by the voters that we are supposed to protect in this state. So it's my hope that we have a great session, but reality is not going to be that.
Tough work ahead. That's why they pay us.
That's why they pay us the big bucks.
Per diem to be legislative. So, going to shift a little bit and continue moving. And Vice Chair Newell, I'm going to begin with you, and I want each of our panelists to have the opportunity to chime in. As you all know, we're wrapping up our very first week of this regular legislative session, and obviously lots of specific bills on the radar. The Criminal Justice Committee is meeting as we speak with a jam-packed agenda. But I want you guys to touch on specific pieces of legislation that you want our listening audience to know about. So, Vice Chair Newell, going to start with you. It could be bills that you filed personally. It can be bills that you're co-authoring or co-sponsoring, or it can be colleagues' bills. But what are some specific pieces of legislation that members of our listening audience should know about?
Thank you. With this being the Urban League, I'm introducing the Crown Act, which is creating a respectful world for natural hair. I introduced this piece of legislation last session, and it failed miserably after it struggled to get out of committee. Just trying to educate my colleagues on the issues of black hair, just the nature of it, and the I have to remember this is live and family friendly. Yes. But the fact that our hair just grows out of our scalp differently, and the stresses that we put on it, on the hair, also puts stress on our family dynamics as well as our income, and then that flows over to the confidence level of adults as well as children. So that is one piece of legislation that I have that I'm bringing up as. And we have some other bills. I can't think of my colleagues right now. I'm so sorry. But we do have a lot of things that are focused on criminal justice as well as education and just trying to make our state better as a whole.
Thank you, Vice Chair Newell. The first Vice Chair of the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus has graced us with his presence, the Honorable Kyle Green, who represents the West Bank of Jefferson Parish. He's an alum of this prestigious law center and very familiar with the Socratic method, and since he's late, I'm going to jump to him. Lots of specific bills, Representative Green, that we want our viewing public to know about. It could be bills that you have filed personally or that our colleagues have filed or that you co-authored or co-sponsored. What are some specific pieces of legislation that you'd like to bring to the attention of our listening public?
Well, thank you, Jason. I am a two-time graduate of the undergraduate and law school. A couple of bills I'm bringing this session. One deals with the repeal of the death penalty. It's a prospective repeal, and it's an institution that I don't think serves the state very well. When it, you talk about the number of people who are on death row, the high rate of individuals on death row who are later exonerated or their sentences are vacated for whatever reasons, the moral implications of that institution, and how the fact that this state is always strapped for cash, and we're going to basically waste dollars maintaining that when it serves no purpose to the public good, and we can probably use that excess dollars in other areas of the state budget. Another piece of legislation I'm bringing is a constitutional amendment that would have an increase of the state minimum wage from currently $7.25 an hour to $11.65 an hour. That is in a constitutional amendment, and so I hope my colleagues would at least let the people decide if they want to raise the minimum wage in the state. Louisiana is one of 5 states in the country that currently we are at the $7.25 mark. The other piece is attempting to tackle the gender pay equity gap we have here in Louisiana. Currently, Louisiana is ranked number 49 out of 50 states in terms of what women make compared to their male counterparts. Women in Louisiana make 69 cents on every dollar as to what a man makes, and it's even worse for women of color who make 53 cents on every dollar. Other areas we're trying to tackle as well as it relates to police reform, we want to create transparency in the police departments of this state, and making sure that we can help weed out those bad actors. And so what we want to do is create a whistleblower protection in departments so that any person who is working in the department who feels that an officer has acted wrongly, that they should have the protection of going forward and shedding some light on the grievances that they feel are happening. And also making sure that when chiefs of police or heads of police departments hire law enforcement officers, that they have the best information possible. So what we want to do is make sure that any complaints that are sustained permanently stay in a law enforcement officer's record, to when he or she goes to get a job somewhere else, their hiring supervisor will have knowledge of that. Currently, there is a 10-year period to where the records will roll off. So, for example, if a cop basically has a sustained use of force complaint, after 10 years, that will roll off. Or if a cop has used a racial slur against a individual, that would roll off. I think those are two instances where that should probably stay in a law enforcement officer's personnel file indefinitely.
Thank you, Representative Green. Representative Jordan, going to shift to you, and then Chairman Pierre, specific pieces of legislation that members of our listening audience should be aware of.
Thank you again, Jason. I will tell you, I've spoken on 3 of them already, and so I'm going to reiterate qualified immunity again, because I think it is probably the most important piece from my perspective that I'm filing this year. But on another note, I will tell you it's not a bill, but it's a resolution that I'm filing that, and I hope to get the help of the Urban League and other civil rights organizations with this. One thing COVID has exposed is the high rate of suicide within the African American population. And so I filed a resolution to create a task force to look at that and inspect that. And so I'm hoping that we can do something with that, because especially with our young people, males and females, but more so African American males, but our females as well. If you look at the numbers since COVID, the increases that have happened within increases in suicide rates among the African American population is just off the charts. It really is very concerning. And so, not that it hadn't gone across all populations, but the jump is really dynamic. So, I've worked with Dr. Frank Campbell, who is probably, I've worked with him in the past, he's probably one of the top suicidologists in the world. And he lives here in Baton Rouge. He's been with Baton Rouge Crisis Intervention. And so he is dedicated himself to work on this project with me. And he's also committed to bringing some of the other top suicidologists all throughout the country to work, and including that there's several African American suicidologists who have been studying the subject for a while. So we're going to be working with them as well as other stakeholders to make sure that we address this issue. The issue of suicide is bigger than suicide itself. It also addresses, we touch on mental illness, but the suicide itself is something that I think that we've ignored for far too long, and so we certainly need to deal with it.
Chairman Pierre, specific bills either that you're bringing or that we can expect to see in the Legislative Black Caucus's legislative package this session?
I think there's a very, very interesting piece. I think the qualified immunity, as he mentioned earlier, is going to be something that we're going to rally behind. Last year, Representative Jordan worked very, very hard to get that piece of legislation out of the House, which we were unsuccessful. But there's a piece that Royce DePlessis has that deals with clean slate. And that deals with someone that would like to have their records expunged. Many years ago, I dropped legislation that talked about ban the box on college applications, which would allow folks that have had some previous, been incarcerated or have had some problems in the past can now go into college and get a college education and go back to work to feed their families. So the clean slate legislation helps with that initiative, and that is not only to get into the schools, but also to get a job. So all of what you've heard from the panel as it relates to workforce, it's going to be really, really key. And as a chairman, I'm going to work diligently to get behind all of those the legislations. Of course, as you know, minimum wage is ridiculous. At $7.25 an hour, you can't feed a family of 4 and be able to to provide for folks in your family. So we're going to rally behind all of those legislations that deal with making a difference in our families and in our communities. You hear about all these social issues. There's a whole bunch of, I would tell you probably half of the bills that we have filed today deals with social issues, but none of them move the needle. None of them moves the needle on moving our state forward. We're still last in the nation in education. Folks in our communities that still can't get a job because they can't do the things that are needed, that are required by the law. And there are some laws that's out there that's unnecessary. So hopefully we'll be able to do legislation and provide legislation that will get people out and back to work and providing for their families.
Representative Larvadain, you serve on the House Labor Committee. Chairman Pierre has touched on minimum wage. We'll see a hodgepodge of minimum wage bills, some raising it directly to $15 an hour, some a more incremental approach. Unfortunately, all of those bills in previous sessions have died a very quick death. Are you hopeful this legislative session that we'll see some progress on the minimum wage front and any other specific bills that you'd like to talk about?
Minimum wage, no. I'll be working with my colleague, Mr. Kyle Green. Just the makeup the makeup of labor is a difficult committee. My colleague next to me, we're on labor. I'm one of the ranking members. Labor's hard. You have 4 African American members and a lot of Republicans. And when you look at 7 1/4, you've got Republicans who feel that 7 1/4 is too much. So when you go into labor, labor's hard. Labor's one of those, you got to pray before you go to labor. Labor's a hard committee. When you look at equal pay for women, we don't want that. That's going to hurt business. But when you look at the men and women at the table, we're trying to help families. Families are struggling. Kyle's going to come in and put on a great presentation, and I'm going to make the motion. I'm going to articulate why we should do it. And I'm going to talk to my colleagues on the committee. But at the end of the day, say, no, we don't want to hurt business. But the problem is that if you want talented people to stay at your job, you're going to have to pay more than 7 1/4. 7 1/4 has been there for ages. When we deal with equal pay with women, some of the first women on the labor, no, we don't want equal pay for women. Why? Because they've been tuned by these large groups who tell them, we don't want that because it's going to hurt the economy. But understand, this workforce is saying, hey, if you want people to work, you're going to pay them $10, $11. With COVID, you're forcing people to pay more. COVID has really helped that minimum wage game because in order to get an employee to come to work, you got to pay $10, $11, $12. So I'll be working with Kyle. I'm working with Ms. Tammy Phelps here, my rep. We're on labor. Mr. Cox is on labor. And then Ms. Barbara Carpenter is the chair. So you have 4 African Americans on labor and a lot of Republicans. And then Matt Cormier is on labor. But there's a lot of Republicans, they just don't want to move that wage. And as much as we fight and we think it's the right thing to do, it's just hard getting votes out there. So I'll be working with Kyle, with minimum wage, equal pay for women. We want to create a good working environment. We've got some bills that are going to deal with workers' comp. You've got a lot of folks who want to do away with workers' comp. They want to reduce this, want to take the medical option out, and it's all kind of stuff. But you've got people on there who just want to hurt families and working people who get hurt. When people get hurt in workers' comp, they want to get health care and return back to work. So that's some of the challenges on labor. But I'll be working with Kyle and Tammy to try to make a difference. But it's going to be a challenge in that committee.
Thank you, Representative Larvadain. Members, we've hit our 12-minute mark, so we're going to be wrapping up. Really appreciate your cooperation. Representative Phelps is going to let you round out this question before we move on to our final question. Any specific bills that you like members of our viewing public to know about?
I'll go for it really quickly. Picking up on the minimum wage, I would just be addressing the tipped wagers employees where that minimum page is $2.13 an hour. Along with the AFL-CIO, we're just going to try to double it. With Louisiana being a hospitality state and catering and food, it makes no sense that we don't appreciate our servers even at this point. I remember last session when we had the conversation, someone from New Orleans came to the table in, wasn't labor, it was about waging, keeping the supplemental pay from the state, from the feds. And like my rep here stated that the look on someone's face when they come asking for help goes out of the door with our colleagues. When the lady said that she was 25 years into catering, the whole dynamic changed because she was looked upon as just wanting additional to keep her supplemental pay. And it didn't change only for one moment, but I still have that lady in mind because that is what New Orleans is built on, Louisiana, and we would not be Louisiana without that industry. The second thing, education, I plead with you to please get our parents more involved. I saw a T-shirt the other day, it says, "Think while it's still legal." You know, we just really have to, I don't know where our education system is going as far as public education and really trying to recruit and retain teachers in that instance. And the third thing, if I could, with Urban League and the Black Caucus, I'm a part of the Sickle Cell Commission, the commission, and we definitely will be looking to bring just more awareness to the treatment of sickle cell in our community.
Thank you, Representative Phelps. Speaking of awareness, just two quick bills that I'll bring to the attention of the viewing public. Obviously, poverty is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and we'll be bringing a bill with Representative Amy Freeman that will require public schools to provide menstrual products in public schools, elementary, middle, and high schools. We have a lot of our citizens living in poverty that cannot afford menstrual products, but even if you can, we have to stop stigmatizing certain bodily functions. Young girls should not be ashamed to be who they are, and they should only have to show up to school and focus on being educated and not worry about a menstrual cycle. And then myself and Representative Richard Nelson are bringing a bill that will prevent courts from suspending driver's license for most non-moving violations and non-violent offenses. So we have reached the final part of our panel, and the last question, and Chairman Pierre, going to start with you. Representative Green, since you were late, I'll end with you, but we'll give everybody a chance to chime in. Going to ask that you keep your responses to about 1 minute and 20 seconds, and I'm going to be counting. Oftentimes, though, you know, look, we make lots of tough decisions at the Capitol. It moves fast and furious and quick. We know the seat of government is located in Baton Rouge. Everybody can't travel to Baton Rouge for every single subject. Some citizens can't travel to Baton Rouge at all for whatever reason, and they feel like they can't be a part of the process. So whether a citizen can travel to Baton Rouge, there are many ways for citizens to be a part of the process. So Chairman Pierre, what would you tell members of the public? How can they be engaged throughout the legislative session? What advice would you give to the public?
Well, each and every one of us that sit on this panel have what we call legislative offices, where you can actually meet with the folks that are working in our office, just to send information to them, either email or drop a letter off to the office while we're here in Baton Rouge, and at some point we will get that information. What I've done in Lafayette is we've provided what we call Legislative Day at the Capitol. We ask that just general people from the community come in on a bus. We provide bus that's located in the Northgate Mall, and they can go in, ride that bus one day, specifically when there's some challenging legislation that we're dealing with. They come in, we provide food, we provide lunch, and we ask them to engage in the process. And it's not only a good way to combat some of the bad legislation, but it's a learning process for those that have never been. You would be surprised at the people of age that have never been to the state capitol. It's the people's house. It's not our house. And we want them to be involved. And of course, all of the groups, the NAACP is always engaged. And we ask that if you are a member of the NAACP, the Urban League, or any of the civil rights organization, to ride with them, to be a part of that mission. It's important that we see it. It makes us feel better that we know people are behind the legislations and anything that we have that we're dealing with. So all I ask is that you engage in the process, call, pick up the phone, email. We're easy to find. Tell a friend that we're engaged in some issues that are important to our state.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Chairman Jordan, you're serving as Vice Chair of the Special Committee investigating the death of Ronald Green. You talked a lot about qualified immunity. If citizens were wanting to weigh in on your bills, wanting to be engaged, if they're passionate about those topics or any other topic, what advice would you give to them to be engaged throughout this legislative session?
Well, I think in addition to the things that Chairman Pierre mentioned, look, you can, if you have internet access, and I say that as an if because I know we have a lot of people that don't have broadband access here in Louisiana, and that's one of the issues we need to fix. But that being said, you can go to house.louisiana.gov. You can go to that page. It'll lead you to a lot of the meetings that you can view online, or you can go to legis.la.gov, and that'll take you to the committee meetings. You can click on those links. You can follow those live when they're happening. Those are archived, so you can also go when they're archived and look at them later on demand at your own time. Beyond that, I would tell you email is good. But Jason, I'd be remiss if I didn't take at least a few seconds to say this. Look, we are a state where we still have a lot of people, a lot of minorities that do not vote. I think the biggest thing, if you want to be engaged, from my perspective, go out and vote. Go out and vote. We have so many people that are unregistered, that don't participate in the process, and we have so many people who are registered who do not go out and vote. Let me tell you something. Your vote matters. Your vote matters now more than ever. And as the African American population by percentage increases in the state, it's going to matter even more. And the more that it matters, the more some people are going to try to prevent you from voting. So the biggest thing, if you want to help me, sure, come to the Capitol, get on the website, send us emails, do all those things. But when it's time to vote, I don't care if it's for dog catcher or if it's for Senate or it's for governor or anything, please go out and exercise your right to vote, because that's the most important thing you can do, because that's really what's going to change the makeup of the state and help us do the things that we need to do in the legislature to help the state progress.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Jordan. Look, Vice Chairman Jordan, Chairman Pierre have seniority, so I'll let them break my 1 minute, 20-second rule. We have 5 minutes to go, so I'm going to be very forceful for the remaining panelists. 60 seconds, Representative Newell, what advice would you give to the public to be involved throughout session?
Echoing everything that Chairman Pierre and Rep. Jordan have said, make sure people vote. If you can't come out to the Capitol, come out. If you have internet access, as it was said, everything is live streamed. If there's an issue that you want to weigh in on in this particular committee, you can email that committee your statement. It will go into the record. If you want your statement read into the record, you can send it to a member on the committee and ask them to read it into the record. So if you cannot come out, you can go that way by email. And I'm going to say it again, and although it's already been said because it needs to be driven home, please get out and vote. There are a lot of voter registration drives going on. You must register. That was a constant question during the redistricting session. When we gave out population and stated the percentage of African Americans in a certain district, the next question, what is the voting age population? So they weren't just looking at how many African Americans are in there in the district to qualify it being a minority majority district, but then they want to know and challenge the fact how many of them are registered to vote. Why do you want this district if it's not that many people registered to vote in the district? If voting wasn't important, there would not have been more than 325 bills filed across this country last year trying to suppress the access to voting. So please get out and register to vote and then exercise your right to vote. You cannot have any voice to complain if you didn't have a part in the process. Know the people that you're putting in office and weigh in on who's going in office. Don't just complain at the end when things don't go your way if you didn't say what you wanted in the beginning.
Thank you, Vice Chair Newell. Representative Green, I'm going to give you the final word. What advice would you give to the public besides to be on time when committee starts? And specifically, what advice would you give to young people? Young people often feel like they're ignored or that they can't be a part of the process because they're not a voting age. So to our listening public that may have children, what advice would you give to our next generation of leaders in order to be involved?
Real quick, to be curious and to question everything.
You do a good job at that.
I do. I really do. Be curious, question everything. I mean, everyone has access or should have access. Most people have access to cell phones. A cell phone is a mini computer, and you have so much information at your fingertips now that it's really no excuse to be ignorant and to not seek and find information. And I mean, that's what I would do. And I'm going to close out by saying ditto. or Me Too to everything that my colleagues to my right have said. They hit the nail on the head. But that's what I would tell young people, to just be curious, to question everything, find information, and challenge your elected officials as to why they take the stances that they take or don't take. And that's the job of self-governing. So.
Thank you, Representative Green. I want to thank my colleagues for their participation in this panel this morning. Certainly, we want to thank the members of the listening public for joining us. On behalf of President Judy Reese-Morris, on behalf of Chairman Vincent Pierre, the Urban League of Louisiana, and the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus, thank you for participating in this panel. Enjoy the rest of today's sessions, and please stay engaged. Thank you.